Hello and welcome to this new session, and this time about One Identity Manager web portal customization. We are talking about Angular, and in this very specific video I like to talk about several deployment scenarios, how you can move your customized software best to the Identity Manager web portal, that means to the API server. If you just look at deployment scenarios, I think one of the easiest way to do something is just to copy and paste files to several locations. But honestly, that could be vastly a pain, especially because if a new API server gets installed or if the old API server gets reinstalled because of some error situations or something else, typically done by admins, then in a standard copy and paste deployment scenario, something will get lost. In this very specific video, I like to show you everything which is necessary just to deploy your different software, starting with a little bit theory and ending up with a full automated scenario. Have fun and follow me. If we look at the deployment of our web components in the Identity Manager Angular based, then we have at least two different processes we need to look at in detail. One is the web client deployment. This is just to deploy the developed functionality for the web client. That means all you do in Angular. And the second type of deployment is, of course, the deployment for something you changed on the API server. That means you made an extension of the API server and you want to deploy that. This is what you do typically in C#, and it is a little bit different to what you do with the web front you build in Angular. These both processes exist, and we have to look at them in detail. And in the first step, of course, we will have a look at the details of the web client development and its deployment. And now let's talk about the details of the deployment process for web client components. As you easily can see, there are typically just two different things could be deployed. There is a static module, which could be, of course, an existing static module like QBM and QER, and there is a new static module, something you might have developed in your specific project. It is something like a customer new static module. From a developer and deployment perspective, these both different types of modules are exactly to be handled the same. That means both of them are part of the application, and to get them deployed, you need to compile the application. The command will be npm run build app and then the name of the app. All static modules get handled like that. After this has happened, you can build your zip file. You see as well that it might need necessary just to delete the HTML if there is an HTML folder in that specific compilation, and then you can move that to the web server and of course restart the web server at the end. In difference to static modules exists dynamic modules. Dynamic modules are product parts you can install or use or not. That means, for example, you can decide you don't need Exchange Online because your Exchange is completely somewhere in Azure, and because of that you don't need on-prem Exchange. In these cases, in the Identity Manager, you will deactivate the Exchange Online module and, surprise, you will not have it installed. This is the reason for these dynamic modules. From a project developer perspective, these dynamic modules, or to create new of these dynamic modules, makes no sense. The reason for is pretty easy. In a project, each project development is planned and paid, and there is typically not the interest of a customer just to turn off specific functionality they have paid for. And so we just look at the deployment process of existing dynamic modules, something like you extended attestation, for example. In this very specific case, you need to run the npm run build lib command. You can then create this very specific module, and the module gets then be just turned into a zip file, and the zip file gets moved to the server, and then the IIS restart will make it active. That means there are exactly two things to do. One thing is just to compile, of course, the web project. This is for all static module changes. And the other one is just to build a specific dynamic module just for the dynamic module changes. And then you have to deploy it, and that is always the same, building a zip file, naming it with HTML underscore in front, and moving it to the specific server. One last existing component is, of course, the new plugin component. And a new plugin component could be currently just a menu or a dashboard tile. Both of them are these new plugin components. Maybe more of these specific plugin components might be developed sometimes, but currently these both are the only ones. And as you easily can see following the arrows, these plugin components are always just an entry somewhere in a static module, in a new static module, or in a dynamic module. That means where you need it, it gets developed. And because of that, there is no specific deployment for these specific component. The reason for is it is part of one of the others, and the deployment process of one of the others will take place. All in all, the summary, it is pretty easy. Static modules gets deployed as the portal or the application. Dynamic modules gets deployed separately, and the rest is always the same. So let's assume we did just the complete coding and we have something tested we want to deploy. There are many ways to do that, and the first way I want to show you is the way a typically developer will do in a test environment just to deploy their specific code. We just assume they have worked on their workstation, they tested locally their specific coding, and now they want to deploy it to the API server. They did is, and that was in the last lecture, they just started here to write these specific folders in the dist folder of their web project. You can see that is my web project, IMX Web, and there's the dist folder, and this is what we created with npm run and so back and so forth. These folders contains modules. You see QBM and QER, two modules we don't need. We only need them to build, for example, the QER app portal. And we see attestation. So the first thing is what I need to know is I have to deploy only the right stuff. And the right stuff in this folder is the app. And it is, of course, the ATT folder, which is a dynamic module. And to do so, I started just to build the first zip file. This is one zip file I built out of the ATT folder. And the second zip file I have to build out of this QER app portal folder. Therefore, I open the portal folder, just select the complete content, and I just create a zip file. And important is to create a zip file, not another compress format, just to ensure that it could later on be used. By the way, if I find here an HTML folder, this needs to be removed first, but however, this is my zip folder. I move it out to the dist folder, and if I'm back, then I do have two of these very specific zip files. These zip files now need to be deployed. And to do so, what I need to do is just to rename them first, because they need a very specific name. Therefore, I have just a look here at my web server. On the right-hand side, you can see the web server. This is IMSO3, my web server, C drive, inetpub, the www root folder, API server, and there is then bin IMX web, which is part of this API server installation. In there, as you can see here in the list, there are a lot of files, and these files are all the files that represent my standard web portal as it is shipped with the Identity Manager. If I now want to change something, what I have to do is I have to create a custom folder. Here in this installation, I have created one. This is to be done manually. And in that custom folder, I need to put all the changed files. And now it's easy to understand what's to do. First, on the left-hand side, I have to ensure that these files are named like the files here. So in this case, I have just to say, this is an HTML underscore HTTP. Now this file name is similar to this file name, which should be replaced later on. Then I take here the portal and do exactly the same. HTML underscore. And now that web portal zip file is exactly the same like that very specific zip file. Next thing to do, of course, is I have to take both zip files, here they are, copy them, and move them into the custom folder here in my IMX web. And now I'm good to go. Especially the only thing what is now necessary is just on the IAS to reset the application. That means here the web server. There is typically an IIS reset installed on such web servers, which is an option of the IIS server installation, by the way. And that script will do it. If I'm not able to run that script remotely, then the best guess is, of course, locally on the server to restart that very specific web service. This is all. In the first step, we have seen how to deploy these specific files using Explorer and copy and paste. The next step should be to think a little bit more about such a deployment. What will happen if in our installation or in our IGA project, the web administrator just decides to reinstall the API server because something is not working well? In this very specific case, he will just run the installer, he will uninstall the API server and install the API server. The whole thing will not take more than 5 minutes, but at the end, all of my modifications are gone. The reason for that is that my copy and paste deployment I did with the Explorer is nothing Identity Manager recognizes, and so all customizations are only available on the developer machine, but not on the API server. The same scenario, by the way, will happen if I decide just to install another API server just for load balancing, because even that new API server doesn't know something about the customization. Web developers have, of course, then to automate their deployment. That means to write copy and paste scripts. This is nothing we want to see. Because of that, there is a second way to do that. We can use the Identity Manager and the Identity Manager capabilities just to ensure that the software gets deployed. In that very specific case, I need a tool which is called the SoftwareLoader. SoftwareLoader is part of the Identity Manager, and the idea is to upload with the SoftwareLoader the files just to the database and to ensure that at the end the API server can download them if they are needed. To do so, I step here to the launchpad of the Identity Manager, and of course I'm starting the SoftwareLoader. Before I upload something, I will do two things. First of all, I will just take the files here on my web server and delete them. And secondly, just to take the files HTML-ATT and HTML-QER and copy these files. And I have, of course, to move them to a very specific folder structure. Therefore, I step to my Identity Manager folder. This is the root of my deployment. I created there, as you can see it here, an auto deploy folder with a bin, IMX web and a custom folder in it. This structure here, bin IMX web custom, is exactly the structure here on the server, bin IMX web custom. I just place my files into that, and now I'm ready to go. With these prerequisites made, I can just jump to my SoftwareLoader. I've started it before, and in the SoftwareLoader I have, of course, to select import to the database. This is what I like to do. Clicking on next will just sign me in with the help of my launchpad. And now you see exactly why I created that specific folder structure. This is because I want to see the same folder structure here. From there on, I need to select the files I want to upload again. Here we are. And you can see in the state column, these are unknown files. This is important for the next step. I press next, and my system prompts me that this is not on the basis of a setup DVD of the Identity Manager. That's right, the uploader is from a specific folder structure and not from a setup DVD, so I say yes. And now the system is prompting me for each file separately which deployment part of the Identity Manager needs that specific file. What's behind there? The Identity Manager has a lot of functionality. There are services, there are client applications like Manager or Object Browser, there are different web services like App Server, API Server, and so on and so forth. Many different types for deployment. And of course, my new files here, the HTML ATT and the QR app portal file here, these are files only suitable for the API server. And because of that, what I have to do is I have to assign a so-named machine role to these specific files so that the auto update feature of the Identity Manager completely understand only the API server needs to download these files from the database. And to do so, I have to select something here from the list for both files. So I select both. The only question is, what's to select? To make the answer very short, in the server section, in the web server section, there is Business API Server, and there is the flag I have to assign. How to know that? The short answer is the easy answer. Look into the HTML5 development guide of the Identity Manager. There it will be described under the section of deployment. Another way, which is a more technical way I typically really like, is just to have an idea on my own using my knowledge about the Identity Manager. Therefore, I take, for example, a SQL tool, here we are, and I look into the table where all of these files are stored, which is QBM file revision. If I just take that very specific table and look into it, you will easily see the result out of it is that you can see here a lot of so-named deployment targets. There are source directories, full paths, there are file names, and this is what shows me all the different files in that very specific thing. The next thing to do is just to search for something I like to find. And that, of course, is something about the API server. If I just look into that, then you will easily see that at the end, there is only one server, Web Business API Server, which is a root. That just came with that specific deployment flag, Business API Server. This is exactly what I need. And because of that, I have selected this. Back to my specific tool, you can see Business API Server was what I have selected. Why I like that technical answer? The technical answer allows me at the end to find all of these deployment targets without just reading a lot of manual pages. However, whatever specific route you choose, at the end you need to assign one or more of these specific targets to ensure the files gets delivered correctly. With that, I can just click on Next. Please ensure you have selected all of your files you want to deploy and assign to each of them the same deployment target. This is by multi-selection here and assigning it there. And then I have to assign, of course, a change label. Change labels later on helps me to transport things, so I typically assign a change label. You can create one, for example, with the plus over here, or you can use just one that already exists. Here is one. I just use this and press Next. Now my files are uploaded. To ensure, I just switch to the object browser. The object browser is, of course, one of the developer tools in the Identity Manager. We have seen it. And I was just selecting the table QBM file revision, which is the tables where all of these files are stored. As you can see, many files in that very specific table. To find my specific files, I just set a filter, and the filter here just say the person who was inserting such new files was me. And just with filtering the content, you will now see the last inserted files from Herwig, and these are, of course, these both files I've uploaded. Doing so, I have now these two files inserted into the Identity Manager database. I was as well assigning a very specific tag to this. And the last thing I have to do, of course, is now to reset my IIS server. To get my remote IIS reset done, the easiest way just is to use a PowerShell and to remotely connect to my IIS server, what I did here. And then with IIS reset, I can just start that specific IIS server. The only thing that is necessary is to ensure that my IIS reset is correctly written. And latest, if the API server has started the first time, you can see as well on the API server, as you see it here, just the 2 deployed files, which are now gets considered. And the good message is, this will happen all the time, even after a new installation, or if I install just another API server. In the very first step, we talked about how we can use the Explorer and copy and paste to get our zip files from our dist folder into the web server. That was easy, just copy and paste into the custom folder, of course. In the second part of the story, we talked about what you should do if you want to ensure that it works well in a project. And therefore, we use the Identity Manager deployment structure. That means we use SoftwareLoader to upload these zip files into the database, and from there per automatically deployment into the structure of the API server. In the last part, I like now to show you a more developer-based way, because typically developers are not really keen to use these fat client tools just to upload something else into the Identity Manager. Here is the developer solution, and to make it pretty clear, it is a working sample. You can download it, of course, absolutely from our Git server, which is just linked to the details of that specific video. And that means if you want to have it super pretty and super slick, it is up to you to improve that code that it fits to your need. That is what you get. We are, as you can easily see, in our IMX web folder. This is the folder where we do all the development. Rafi was doing back and forth a lot of things. And of course, we have published something to the dist folder. That is quite here. We produced the ATT and of course the app portal folder. QER and QBM are necessary, but we don't need them to deploy because these are static modules, and static modules are included into the app. Now we like to deploy that to our API server. Therefore, in the tool, we press here Ctrl, Shift and B. And I get tasks, and as you can easily see, there is a task, upload dist folder entries to the database. I will just start that task. You see here in the terminal, write the message that says, do you like here to handle specific files, for example, the ATT folder? I will say, yes, this is something I like to deploy. It automatically creates zip files for me, with the right name, of course. And it will do that same thing exactly for each of these entries there. So that means, well, QBM, I don't need QBM. QER, I don't need QBR, but I need, of course, the portal. And therefore, I press yes again. Once that is done, the solution automatically takes these zip files, and as you can see it there in the message, uploads them to the database. And once the upload is complete, the script is successfully ended, and my files are in the database again. If I want to see them, I can step again here into my object browser. I can search for the new files, and of course, here they are. This is exactly the same than you saw before, just using the fat client, but this time it is script-based. What's necessary just to do that? That means what is necessary for you if you want just to use that solution on your machine. First of all, you need, of course, that very specific auto deployment folder here, which contains the right files. If you don't have them, don't worry about it. It gets automatically created. But auto deploy need to be here. Secondly, you need the script. The script, you can get it from GitHub, is this deployment IMX client content PS PowerShell script, which contains the complete code. To make that PowerShell file part of the task, what you have to do is you have to go into your VS Code directory, which is in the root of your development structure, and just add this task JSON file. The task JSON file comes with these 2 tasks automatically, which are just relatively related to the PowerShell files who are just sitting in the same root folder. Last but not least, if you want to debug the PowerShell files here, that means you want to develop or redevelop these PowerShell files, it might make sense in the launch JSON just to ensure that you not only can start the web portal which is the standard entry there, you need to add as well something for the PowerShell, for PowerShell debugging, which is then an option you can easily add there. Therefore, you can use standard ways, just the command palette of your specific Visual Studio Code, and then you can just add, for example, debugging or something else. All of these files, again, are part of our Git structure. You can just download them together with the rest of the content, and maybe this is a good starter for you, just to auto-deploy things. And again, I know it is a little bit annoying, but it is necessary. This is a working sample. There is no guarantee. This is not a piece of software from One Identity. It is just a working sample from One Identity Technical Enablement that says, hey, that is the idea just to handle this specific term. That means please use it for your own risk and deploy it and share it with others as you like it.